I was recording part 2, chapter 1, it bothered me that I left this story out. Just the order that I recorded all the information, it would have been inconvenient to put this in, but it is one that stuck with me. So for reference, I did find a picture of the inside of a Stolypin car. You can imagine the top bunk, the bottom bunk, the wire doors and windows. There was once a Russian girl who was arrested in the morning, given a trial, transported. She was put in a Black Maria car with a bunch of thieves. This was a newlywed, by the way. The thieves proceeded to gang rape her, and when the car got to its destination, she made an official complaint to the prison guards, but they just rolled their eyes. Thieves will be thieves. They are rowdy and disobedient by nature. What do you want us to do? So this story is one good example of the carelessness and inhumanity the guards had towards the prisoners, as well as just the horrible conditions of these transport trains. This painting is called Life is Everywhere by Russian painter Yaroshenko. It was mentioned in part 2, chapter 1 of Solzhenitsyn's book. Yaroshenko lived from 1846 to 1898, so he never got to see the revolution. Never even got to see a lot of the stuff that led up to the revolution. Good for him. He was known for depicting realism, so in this picture it's a painting of prisoners looking out a window and seeing birds. And after reading Solzhenitsyn's chapter on the devolution of prisoner rights, that's real. That's some real stuff. If you look through his other paintings, he painted a lot of scenes of real life, often sad scenes, often scenes of people going through hardship. There's a painting titled Funeral of a Firstborn. That title speaks for itself. You can Google and see that if you want. On a lighter note, he did do some happy scenes as well. In particular, a painting called The Swing and also a painting called The Gypsy. Those two caught my eye. I rather enjoyed those. As for this painting, he painted a time when the fight for prisoner rights was filled with sweet summer children. Pyotr Arkadyevich Stolypin, the man whose namesake is the Stolypin car. He was Prime Minister of the Russian Empire from 1906 until his assassination in 1911. He was known as a reformer. He certainly did a lot. Especially in farming, he did grant the right of private land ownership to the peasants. That was a big deal for the time because Russian culture, Russian economy at that point, was very much still reminiscent of feudal times, at least at that bottom rung, where the barons had wide control over the peasants who worked their farmlands. To go along with this, though, he was a part of the harsh crackdown on the revolutionary activity, martial law, speedy trials and executions. His goal was to support the monarchy by modernizing the agriculture industry, setting up the Russian economy to transform in a way that would fit with the new century. He very much wanted to avert the land crisis by setting up a social class of land-owning peasants, but revolutionary Russians had other plans. This is Russian writer Pyotr Filipovich Yakubovich, mentioned by Solzhenitsyn in multiple places in his book. He was born in 1860, graduated from Petersburg University in 1882. No stranger to political activism, he organized the Young People's Will Party. And he picked a bad century for anti-government political action in Russia. He ended up spending more than a decade of his life in exile in Siberia. That was during the 1890s. He did write under a pseudonym in his time in prison. He wrote a lot of poems that he became well known for. These poems had a great influence on all the revolutionaries, who ended up overthrowing the government twice in 1917. So you can imagine during the first 3-4 decades of the Soviet Union, he was held up as a national hero. The Red Terror was the first wave of arrests in 1917 and 1918. This was when the infamous Cheka was just getting started out, didn't have its feet underneath it yet. It also came at a tumultuous time for Russia. They had just signed the peace agreement which took them out of World War I, and they ceded a bunch of land to go with it. Not even the Bolsheviks were agreed on whether or not that was the best idea. Now, this combined with a failed assassination attempt on Lenin, which almost succeeded. He was in the hospital for a while. Assassination attempt by another left-wing revolutionary party. This fueled a big wave of arrests and reprisals in order for the newly formed government to get its nation under control. Now, before even Krylenko had a chance to lay all of the groundwork for his legal code, you can rest assured that these 1918 arrests were just as arbitrary, random, and meaningless as the 1930s arrests. And I will remind you again of the famous line, yes, execution is illegal. He wasn't sentenced to execution, he was sentenced to be shot. Sketches of the Criminal World, Further Kolyma Stories by Varlam Shelemov. This is a book directly referenced in Gulag Archipelago, Part 2, Chapter 3 by Solzhenitsyn. It is another book of another person who was arrested. This guy in 1936 as opposed to Solzhenitsyn's 1945. So they were arrested 9 years apart. Also, Solzhenitsyn had 11 years in the Gulag. Salamov got 17. And Salamov's term was not easy either. He was put in the Kolyma, I believe, for his entire time there. So when Solzhenitsyn talks about starting up new camps, getting transported, working in 17 below zero, working in the snow, mining for gold, in a far eastern desolate wasteland of Siberia, that's what Shalamov was doing at the time when Solzhenitsyn was on his special convoy over to Moscow. And Shalamov also wrote his own book about it, which I believe was translated to English in 2020 and published, so you can go read that. Nikolai Timofeyev Rozovsky. That is the name of the renowned biologist with whom Solzhenitsyn shared a cell in the Butyrki after he was taken back to Moscow by special convoy. Rozovsky was born in 1900, and if you remember, he was in Germany doing research between 1936 and 1945. When the Soviets took over, they captured him from Germany and put him in a gulag, but they recognized his scientific achievements, and they put him in the same program as Solzhenitsyn, who falsely claimed to be a nuclear physicist. Rozovsky himself had a good end, though the Soviet Union used his work for bad purposes. They had him doing nuclear research, bioweapon research, and genetic research, as well as radiobiology, and he died at the ripe old age of 80 in Moscow. As for his prison term, he got a tenor. He got released in 1955. However, his status was non-rehabilitated ex-prisoner, meaning he couldn't travel and he couldn't accept awards on his own behalf.